This is the story of how two couples of American retirees missed their cruise. Picture Nancy and George sprinting down the Miami pier in a panic, desperate to catch their long-awaited cruise, but the celebrity silhouette is already pulling away. While they argue about whose fault it is, they spot another couple, Barbara and Thomas, also running late. Instead of getting annoyed, everyone starts laughing and introduces themselves. Not wanting to waste their vacation, they come up with a brilliant plan. The pier buzzed like a beehive on a hot day. The air was thick and sticky, like old maple syrup, filled with the cries of seagulls, ship horns, and the heavy breathing of two late tourists. Their suitcases clattered on the boards, practically announcing to all of Miami, "These two are the last idiots on the shore." I repeat, these two are the last idiots on the shore. Nancy gripped the handle of her blue duct-tape suitcase like she was grabbing George by the throat, a death grip. George puffed along behind, his face beet red like a tomato that's long overdue for the trash. "It hasn't left yet," Nancy rasped, though her voice was more hopeful than confident. "It's already halfway to the Bahamas," George groaned, out of breath. "And by the way, it's all because of that stupid parking lot. Who designs a parking lot with one exit and 13 dead ends?" They ran like two actors in a varicose vein cream commercial. Desperate, ridiculous, absolutely pointless. The ship, huge and gleaming white like the wedding cake of your dreams, slowly drifted away from the pier. It wasn't even in a hurry, as if it knew these two never stood a chance. Like an old lover, it sailed off with style and fanfare, with an orchestra, with flags, and with contented tourists on deck watching the chase of two failed cruisers. "Choke on your stoplight," Nancy barked, gasping for air. "I told you we should have left earlier." "How was I supposed to know you'd spend half an hour choosing between two identical swimsuits?" "They're not identical. One has lining, and the other makes my chest look like Pamela Anderson's." "Well, we made it. Or rather, we didn't." George waved towards the ship, now just a trail of foam. They stopped at the very edge of the pier. Sweat ran down their backs, hearts pounding, legs trembling. And of course, right then, a cruise company notification popped up on George's phone. "Welcome aboard. Enjoy a cocktail by the pool." He showed it to Nancy. Without looking, she smacked him on the shoulder. "You know, George, if we'd left at 7:30 like I suggested, we'd be eating shrimp right now. Instead, we're standing here like a couple of idiot tourists, and the only thing ahead of us is a burrito from a food truck in the parking lot." "Call it a culinary quest," George grumbled. "Lose your ship. Find a burrito." They sat in silence, watching the stern of the ship disappear. Somewhere on deck, someone waved, either out of kindness or happy that these two wouldn't be in the jacuzzi. A tear rolled down Nancy's face, or maybe it was sweat. She wiped her face, plopped down on her suitcase, and sighed. "Well, at least now we have time to discuss which one of us is the real idiot," she said with a smirk. "I say it's a tie," George replied, sitting next to her. "A medal for each, sabotaging our own vacation." He took her hand. Nancy almost pulled away, but left it there. The palm was sweaty, but it was his. They sat by the water's edge like two retirees without a pension, but with a sense of humor. "Next time," Nancy mumbled, "we'll leave a day early." "For the ship?" "For the parking lot. It's a quest, remember?" And they laughed, bitterly, through sweat and frustration. But now, together. Somewhere far out on the horizon, the ship still looked, almost within reach. Almost. "Tell me, George, how do you forget a phone charger?" Nancy huffed, pulling from her backpack a list as long as a roll of wallpaper, titled Cruise Preparation, version 5.3. "We always have two on the nightstand. I even left a sticky note. Don't forget, George." "I thought it was a joke," George grumbled, digging through the side pocket of his suitcase as if a charger, ticket, or maybe even a conscience might suddenly appear. Like, the adventure begins with the first forgotten gadget. Well, here it is, right on schedule. They sat on a bench by a diner called Taco Tide, where everything smelled like cornmeal, fried onions, and a touch of despair. Their suitcases stood nearby, tired witnesses to a family drama. It felt like they might start arguing with each other any second. Nancy's eyebrow twitched, the same one she used to raise like Meryl Streep when she was mad. George claimed it now looked more like a sparrow hiding in the grass. But that was an argument for another day. Remember how we packed? Nancy leaned back on the bench, exhausted. I made that list for 3 weeks, printed it out, checked everything off. I sorted everything. Must have, medical, in case of a zombie apocalypse. And I was in charge of entertainment, George said, a little offended. Load up the tablet with shows, find crosswords, buy a frog-shaped neck pillow. I did everything. Almost. Almost, Nancy repeated, poking his backpack. And the tickets? Who forgot to print the tickets? They're in the app, on my phone, George protested. On the phone that's almost dead, and without a charger. Genius. You're basically the Elon Musk of retirees. He threw up his hands as if surrendering. Though really, to hide a smile, he always thought Nancy was especially beautiful in moments like this. Once he even said it out loud, and slept on the couch for a week. So now he admired her, silently. Okay, Nancy sighed deeply. The main thing is, we're both alive, healthy, and... She trailed off, frowning. What's on my shirt? She stared at a coffee stain the size of southern Georgia, right in the center of her light blouse. George looked down, embarrassed. Great, she said, standing up to inspect herself. Now I'm breakfast for the seagulls, and you're not much better. Did you notice your suitcase isn't yours? George blinked. What do you mean, not mine? It's green, George. Yours was gray. This one looks like Godzilla's wetsuit. But it rode with us in the taxi. You know who else was in that taxi. Some guy in shorts with a drum. Maybe it's his suitcase. He opened the suitcase, as if inside it might say, You're an idiot. Inside were a bright beach sarong, flippers, and a t-shirt that read, Party Lizard. George pulled out the shirt and looked at it like it might reveal the meaning of life. Well, maybe it's for the best. My wardrobe needed a shake-up. George, if I see you wearing that, I'm writing my will, and you're not getting the coffee maker. He grinned. She did too. After all, they'd been together 30 years. In that time, they'd lost luggage, missed flights, mixed up travel dates, but always found a way to get lost together. Sometimes, literally. Stay tuned. It gets even better. Run, Barbara! Run! Shouted Thomas, hopelessly 3 meters behind. His sandals clearly weren't made for sprinting down a wooden pier that bounced underfoot like a hangover trampoline. You're the one who said we had plenty of time, snapped Barbara, not slowing down. 15 minutes, you said. Enough for coffee and a selfie. How was I supposed to know the bathroom line on the pier would be longer than the doctor's office in November? Against the backdrop of the departing ship, their shouts sounded like the desperate echo of tourist hopes. Barbara waved her arms toward the ship so energetically that even a seagull flying by decided to climb higher, away from human drama. On a bench farther down the pier, Nancy and George were still exchanging sarcastic remarks when suddenly they heard hurried footsteps, ragged breathing, and the barking of suitcase wheels. Whoa, déjà vu, Nancy remarked, adjusting the coffee stain on her shirt. Is this some kind of latecomers flash mob? Even their suitcases look the same, added George, just sportier, or maybe more battered. Barbara and Thomas froze when they saw the departing ship. Barbara collapsed first onto the bench. Well, that's it, our 20th anniversary, and it's already a disaster. Look on the bright side, said Thomas. I've never run so in sync with you before. Maybe this was our wedding quest. At these words, Nancy couldn't hold back. She snorted, covering her mouth with her hand. George chuckled into his mustache. Their eyes met, and suddenly, out of disappointment, frustration, and exhaustion, something unexpectedly lively was born. A light sense of the absurdity of it all. You guys missed the ship too. Barbara asked, sitting up. No, we just came to watch our dream sail away, replied Nancy. Oh, so now we're a club. Thomas perked up. The club of people who almost went on a cruise but missed the bathroom suck shuttle. Life. The four of them laughed, not a nervous laugh, but a warm one, the kind that happens between strangers suddenly thrown into the same boat, even if they never actually boarded it. I'm Barbara, this is Thomas, the woman said, still catching her breath. We're from Ohio. George and Nancy, we're from New Jersey. Hey, that even rhymes, noted George. Guess it's fate. So how did you miss it? Barbara asked. He mixed up the suitcase and the parking lots, said Nancy. And she was picking out swimsuits, added George. Our shuttle left without us, Barbara exclaimed. All because Thomas decided to buy a Lucky Anchor pendant. I didn't know it was made of tin and would give me a rash, Thomas protested, scratching his neck where the pendant still glimmered. They sat on the bench like a losing team that, for some reason, wasn't upset at all. Behind them, the ship sailed away. Ahead was the unknown. But right now, there was a sea breeze, the smell of salt, and new friends to laugh about it all with. Well, my fellow losers, said George, how about some ice cream? We've got nothing but free time now, and new luggage with a party lizard shirt. Barbara nodded. What matters isn't the route, it's who you mess it up with. All four burst out laughing. Ahead was an empty day, and maybe the start of something totally unpredictable. Maybe we should hit the bar and celebrate this little event, said Nancy. The bar was nearly empty. Behind the counter, a bored bartender in a mojito therapy t-shirt kept scratching his rare beard, as if checking if it would fall off. On the table between them stood 4 glasses of rum, amber, strong, slightly spicy, like the conversation of old friends who've just met. Here's to those who almost made it on the cruise, Thomas announced, raising his glass. Almost is my favorite word, Barbara agreed. I almost relaxed, almost trusted, almost didn't yell at my husband. By the way, she said, turning to Nancy, you know what's funny? This was the first time I let Thomas plan the route. Usually, I'm like you, with folders, printouts, notes on my phone. Wow, whistled George. That's a big step. And he, Barbara poked her husband, got distracted by a stand of magnets and nearly bought me a dolphin brooch made out of foil. It was seashells, Thomas protested. Eco-friendly and almost pretty. Almost, Nancy repeated with a smirk. Almost is our thing, added George. The bartender lazily wiped the counter, watching the group get rowdier at the bar. By now, their talk wasn't complaints or anger. It sounded more like a bunch of school kids who'd been left out of a field trip and decided to have their own. Hey, do you guys even know where this floating palace is heading next? Nancy suddenly asked, propping her chin on her hand. Barbara pulled out her phone, scrolling for a moment. Santo Domingo, by tomorrow evening. George echoed, raising an eyebrow. And how far is it to the Dominican from here, if we, say, forget common sense? You mean? Barbara started slowly. What if? Nancy chimed in. We catch up with the ship at the next port? Thomas finished, slapping the table. For a second, everyone fell silent. Even the bartender stopped scratching his beard. That's insane, said Nancy. Agreed, Barbara nodded. Totally nuts. Logistically, a disaster, added George. Financially, sketchy, Thomas said. But it sounds like something straight out of a Netflix series. Or at least a rum commercial, Nancy grinned. They looked at each other. The glances were all different. Excited, skeptical, playful, tired. But there was the same spark in everyone's eyes. Why not? We're grown-ups, Barbara said. We've got money, passports, and apparently a serious shortage of spontaneity. So let's fix that, George concluded. 2. Mission chase the dream? To the mission, came 4 voices at once. They clinked glasses, and it was suddenly obvious. From here on out, nothing would go as planned. And that was the best thing that could have happened today. The four of them sat together, huddled over their glowing phones, checking cruise schedules, flights, taxi fares, and endless lists of things to do at night in Puerto Plata. On Nancy's phone, the next port was showing. Amber Cove, Dominican Republic, arrival the next day at 5:30 p.m. George was mumbling about layovers, Thomas was already Googling local taxis, and Barbara was searching for the best bars and beaches. "Okay," Nancy said, feeling a shiver down her back. "I'll call the cruise company." "Are you sure?" George asked, giving her a doubtful look. "What if they say it's already too late?" "Well, at least we'll find out," she decided. Nancy pressed call. A calm operator's voice answered. "Good afternoon. This is Celebrity Cruises customer service. How can I help you?" "Hi," Nancy began. "We missed our ship's departure from Miami. Is it possible to rejoin the ship in Amber Cove?" "Let me check. Please stay on the line." Upbeat music played on hold, a little too cheerful for the moment, while Barbara squeezed Nancy's hand tight. Thomas and George held their breath like they were waiting for exam results. "Yes, ma'am," the operator finally replied. "If you arrive before check-in closes in Amber Cove and have your documents and tickets, you'll be able to board there." "Seriously?" Nancy asked, not believing her ears. "Absolutely. Just let us know once you book your travel so we can update your boarding port." The call ended, and tense silence fell. "Well?" George asked quietly. Nancy looked up, her face frozen with relief, joy, and almost childlike wonder. "We can get on board in Amber Cove." "What?" all four of them shouted. "We can board the ship in the Dominican Republic tomorrow," she confirmed. "The main thing is to be there on time, with our documents." There was a 1-second pause, and then the whole group broke out laughing, loud, genuine, and full of relief. Barbara clapped her hands, Thomas tossed his phone in the air, and George kissed Nancy on the forehead. "I can't believe we're doing this," she breathed. "So far, we're just planning," George grinned. "Well, this is it, the start of the adventure," Barbara added. "We're together." They all scooted closer, each staring at their screens, checking tickets, booking hotels, looking up taxis, and arguing about sunscreen and swimsuits. Their talk mixed anxiety, hope, and that rare feeling when life suddenly becomes unpredictable. And finally, that felt good. 4 people, 1 goal, and a ticket to a real vacation, full of mistakes, detours, jokes, and new dreams. The plane soared into the sky, and 4 tired but determined travelers dove into the chaos of their new journey. In the taxi, where the GPS seemed to be working against them, they argued non-stop, mixed up hotel addresses, changed plans on the fly, and laughed at every single mistake. George grumbled, "Now I get why we'll never be orienteering champions," while Nancy replied with dry irony that if it weren't for her, they'd all be sitting in the bushes talking about local mangoes. The whole mess seemed to weave them into one unpredictable melody, where every note was a new chance for a joke. That evening, in a cozy bar overlooking the sparkling lights of the waterfront, they sipped their cocktails, each with their own drink, like flags from different countries planted on the table. Raising her glass, Barbara joked, "Well, if we lost the first day of the cruise, let's make it the weirdest memory ever." Thomas nodded, winking. "Perfect! We'll tell the grandkids how we fooled fate twice." And Nancy, smiling into her glass, thought how these conversations, just a little bitter but so funny, were like a life ring in the middle of their ocean of confusion. Real friendship was starting to grow between them, still cautious, but already warm. Different personalities, different habits, and a sense of humor that wove together like threads in a cozy old blanket. George was the grumpy optimist, Barbara the life of the party with a touch of sarcasm, Thomas always ready with a joke at just the right moment, and Nancy suddenly noticed that all their slip-ups, mistakes, and laughter had made them a team. Maybe a little absurd, but a real one. Somewhere in the background, the waves were softly rolling in, as if to remind them. The adventure was just beginning. When they finally stepped aboard the ship at Amber Cove, Their faces glowed with tired but genuine joy. Their suitcases were slightly dusty, clothes wrinkled from all the taxis, layovers, and late-night bars, but their eyes shone with the fire of winners, those who'd actually caught their dream. George looked around with his trademark half-smile. "Well, folks, we're like battle-hardened veterans who survived the last fight, just with luggage," he muttered, trying to sound composed, though his heart raced. Nancy could barely breathe from happiness, or maybe just exhaustion. The steward, guiding them to check-in, studied the quartet with a faint smile. "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. And another Mr. and Mrs.?" Their laughter erupted in unison, tinged with relief, pride, and wonder. Barbara winked at Thomas. "They seem surprised we actually made it." "I would be too," Thomas agreed. "People usually arrive on schedule, not through sheer stubbornness." That evening at their first formal captain's dinner, they sat together as if it had always been their tradition. The atmosphere was light and effortless, like old friends reuniting rather than strangers who'd met just yesterday. Jokes flew across the table, mingling with wine, stories, awkward toasts, and bursts of uncontrollable laughter. Pouring himself another glass, George remarked, "If someone told me a year ago I'd end up in this mess, I'd call it a prank." Nancy smiled. "I'd have bet $2 on us, not to win, mind you, just for the spectacular finale." Their laughter rang out, bright, loud, real. This moment felt like that first gasp of fresh air after a storm, when you realize, against all odds, you made it. Under the cruise ship chandeliers, they sensed the adventure wasn't over. Traffic jams, missed connections, wrong suitcases. None of it mattered now. What mattered was who sat beside you. What mattered was laughing. What mattered was truly living. Bathed in the golden glow of sunset, the deck radiated warmth as if nature itself was rewarding these tired but happy travelers with a moment of pure peace. The wind had stilled, just a gentle breeze playing with their hair and spreading that irrepressible smile earned through hard-won joy. Grinning, Nancy turned to Barbara. "You know, I haven't laughed like this in years." Her eyes sparkled with happiness and just a hint of exhaustion that now felt like part of the adventure. Barbara squeezed her hand. "Exactly. Sometimes real joy is born from chaos." The breeze caressed their hair like a whisper. There are more moments ahead, full of laughter, new stories, and unpredictable turns. Thomas and George, completely absorbed, were locked in an epic ping-pong battle. Their competitive banter felt so authentic they might have been childhood friends rediscovering their bond. "Think I'd let you win, George?" Thomas taunted, slamming the ball so hard he nearly toppled the table. "Bring it, old-timer!" George shot back, matching his energy and laughter. Their playful rivalry echoed across the deck, blending with sunset hues, seagull cries, and the whisper of waves. Tourists snapped photos for albums, but the real magic happened right here, between four people who'd dared to embrace unplanned happiness. They knew this vacation began when everything went wrong. Yet from that chaos came their greatest adventure. Memories forever scented with salt water, sunsets, and unexpected friendship. The last day on board, the ship felt like a warm dream. Nancy, George, Barbara, and Thomas no longer felt like outsiders. In just a few days, they'd explored every corner of the ship, greeted waiters by name, nodded to familiar stewards, joined in all the little insider rituals, like old friends for whom being late no longer mattered at all. The ship had suddenly become more than just a vessel. It felt like a real home, a place where you could forget your worries, shuttles, luggage, and that constant rush. In the evening, at their farewell dinner with the sun touching the horizon outside the window, the conversation turned to the future. Thomas, squinting slyly, raised his glass. "How about we book our next cruise, but only if we all go together?" Nancy winked. "Only if George doesn't mix up the suitcases." Laughter rolled around the table, light and genuine, like when you're a kid and everything is still ahead of you. Barbara added, No plans, no racing after anything, just together, again. And despite all the jokes, there was a real promise in the air of new meetings, new routes, and adventures they definitely wouldn't miss next time. A gentle evening breeze ruffled their clothes, and each of them suddenly realized this moment was the beginning of something new. Because sometimes, to find your ship, you first have to get a little lost. What looks like a failure can actually be the door to a brand new chapter of life. The main thing is not to cling to irritation, but to let fate play a little, have its fun. That way, even a random mistake can turn into a friendship, and an unexpected detour becomes the most memorable journey. And maybe, just maybe, that's what a real adventure is all about.